speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, great, thank you. We have two panels in the afternoon session. For any audience members who jumped on who weren't here for the morning session, I'll just let you all know the panelists, the speakers have about 10 minutes to talk, and then we have about 20 to 25 minutes for questions. All of the participants in the roundtable can ask questions, but audience members can also send in questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and I will relay them as best I am able during the Q&A section of each panel. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. And I'll welcome you all back, and we're going to kick off the afternoon session with panel 4, the evolution of text, and begin with Piotr Gibas, Associate Professor of Asian Studies at the College of Charleston, who's speaking on the curse of true and the mechanics of punishment in early Chinese historical narrative. Takes away, Piotr.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Let me try and share my screen. I am really nervous about this, so please, be forgiving. Yes, so the curse, can you see my screen now? Yes, okay. So the curse of Chu, I've already presented on this a few times, and I'm still trying to figure out the best way to, what to do with this text. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the text, I have a short introduction about the text. It is a Warring States stone stele inscription. There were 3 master copies that existed originally, but I will be using only one version of this text, which was processed by Kuomo Ruo, who studied and edited the text. So the original text, of course, doesn't survive. Even the rubbing, the original rubbing of the original stele doesn't survive. So what we have is just like further copies, but they are deemed to be authentic. Only one of the copies, Kuomo Ruo, doesn't think it's authentic. So I'll be using this version of the text that Kuomo Ruo published in 1944. So about the background of the text, it is a stele inscription, and it is a curse. The background, the historical background is that there was a conflict between King Huiwen of Qin and King Huai of Chu. Basically, it goes back to breaking a covenant. There existed a covenant between the 2 states, Qin and Chu, and Qin accuses Chu of breaking that covenant that existed for 18 generations. Who was right and who is wrong, history doesn't agree, because Qin was as much unfair to Chu as Chu was to Qin. But at this point in this text, Qin accuses Chu of breaking that covenant. Now, so King Huiwen of Qin accuses King Huai of Chu of breaching that covenant, and he calls the spirit world, he calls the spirits to go and punish the king of Chu. So he says, because in the text, because Chu broke the covenant, I call on the specific spirits. There are 3 spirits that he specifically calls to go and punish Chu. Now, there's some obvious questions about this that I want to ask. One is, what is the function of this text at all? Because on the face value, it's a curse, it's like a call to arms, but what is it really? Why was it written? We'll see why this is an important question. And why was there need to carve it in stone? Why couldn't it be just like a text written on paper? Then what does the text really contain? Why does the king of Qin call on the spirit world to help with the punishment? And then how does he get their help? What does he do to get their help, to get them to help him? Now, there are some clear answers to these questions. One is that the text is a call to arms. Second is that he mobilizes the spiritual forces to defeat the enemy. And he wants to, basically, the whole idea is that Qin wants to punish Chu. Now, how do you do this? How do you punish Chu? Normally, you would just assume that there will be a military action to do this. And so Qin was doing that. Qin was, they claimed they were defending themselves from Chu's invasion. So they want to punish True by also sending the force and defeating them, but also calling the spirits to do this. So here's a sample of the text when this is the direct appeal to the spirits to go and punish True for this. Now, to understand the contents or what this text really is, we need to do some we can look for some intertextual connections. So this True, this curse of True, this text is what we could call a sort of a covenant text. Generally speaking, in early China states, warring states that had covenants, there always was a text written, and there was a formula to when there was a covenant taken, they would take an oath, they would write a text. And in each of, we can see those texts, especially many samples were excavated from the Homa foundry, where those texts were preserved, the texts of the covenants. So they always have the same structure, the same contents, and always that spirits who are the guarantees of this covenant. Basically, there's a formula that says that if any part of the covenant should breach this covenant, there are specific spirits that are supposed to go and punish the person who breaches the covenant. So you have here this one example from an authentic text excavated in Homa that say, may our former rulers far-seeing instantly detect me and may ruin before my lineage. This is saying that the spirits of the ancestors are supervising this, they're supervising this covenant, and if this covenant should be broken, then there will be spirits who will go and punish the offender. And many texts like this we can find in the Zhuozhuan. And then also we can see the discourse, we can see some sort of a philosophical debate about this punishment, what kind of punishment this is, how this should work. But there's a lot of texts, a lot of instances when two states or more sign a covenant, and every time in each case, they always have this, they enclose the spirits that if the covenant is broken, the spirits that are always defined as Ming, the Mingwei, the far-seeing spirits, they should kill and punish the offender. So, but is this intervention really necessary? What comes out in the Zhuozhuan is that they assume that this is a formula in the covenant text. If somebody actually really breaks the covenant, there's no need to call the spirits anymore. The spirits will see it and act automatically. So in other words, if Qin wants to punish True for breaching the covenant, they don't need to go and write a text and call the spirits, because the spirits who supervise the covenant should automatically have already acted. So there's no action needed. Also, there's a question of sincerity. In the Zhuozhuan, in many texts, they say that the spirits can see the contents of the heart, and they see who really breached the covenant. So who really is right and who really is wrong. So the spirits don't need to be told. The spirits will always see the wrongdoer and punish him. So then why does the king of Qin need to write this supplication? Why does he need to write the curse? Why does he need to appeal to the ghosts and actually write it and carve in stone? So there are some historians who very convincingly argue that the ruler of Qin was actually superstitious, and that he actually believed that the ghosts would act and hoped for it, actually believed that they should. But he had a problem with sincerity, because he knew that, you know, this wasn't so clear-cut and white and black. So he needed to prove, he needed to convince the spirits that he was the one who was offended, not the offender, that True was wrong and he was right. So he wanted to convince the spirits to go on his side and punish True. Now we can talk about the role and function of historical narrative, because in order to convince the spirits that he was right, he writes a historical narrative, his own. And in this historical narrative, he just presents basically the offenses of True. He presents the history of the offenses. So the structure of the narrative that we see on the stele is first the appeal to the ghosts, then he recalls, he says that there was the covenant that was broken by True, and then he denounces the king of True, calling him an immoral person who abuses pregnant women, whose government is a mess. Then there's the list, the historical narrative of the list of the grievances, all the things, all the acts, the evil acts that Chu committed against Qin. And then later he claims that because of all this, he has the right to mete out the punishment. So he's the person who needs justice. And therefore, he says, I write this and I put this on the stele so that the ghosts can see that I am the person who needs to be satisfied here. So I just think that I'll jump over very fast. And this text is generally very similar to the so-called harangues, the Shi, in the Shangshu. And so they are similar in contents and in narrative structure. This Curse of Chu is very similar to some of those harangues. Those harangues are also calls to arms. Every harangue is a call to arms. And they're asking for a punitive action against an offender. They're asking for a just war, meaning it's not an invasion, not an attack, but because, for example, Zhou and Shang, the King Wu of Zhou claims that the ruler of Shang is corrupt and immoral, and his government is a mess, and he's abusing his people, and therefore heaven took away the mandate of heaven, the mandate, and gave it to me, and now I am acting on behalf of heaven, and I will go and punish this offender. So he denounces the offender as immoral and unworthy. Then there's also the list of offenses. There's like also a list of what this person did. And then the divine intervention, not calling upon the ghosts, but becoming a ghost, because this ruler who goes into battle undergoes a special ritual in the temple, and they basically kind of become living ancestors. So they act on behalf of heaven. So they are like the punitive ghosts who go and punish the other guy. So why does this all matter? In a recent publication, Martin Kern concludes that at some point during the Zhou dynasty, there existed a blueprint for pre-battle harangues. And then there existed a textual repertoire. Different parts of the textual material could be invoked on different occasions and in different texts. So every time somebody needed to call to arms, could use the material that existed in this hypertext and compose their own text. So, for example, he says that the pronouncements in the Qin Shi Huang's 7 stele inscriptions that were erected in the aftermath of the imperial unification. So those were selections from those harangues as well. They were part of the same, so to speak, archive of the hypertext that they could use to compose their own call to arms, their own narrative. And they invariably, the contents was very similar. Now, the functions of the harangues in the Shangshu, as we speak about the Shangshu, what was the function of those harangues? They were not written before the actual battle and preserved until our times. They were written much later using the material, as Martin Kern argues, from this textual archive. And so they were not actual calls to arms, like you want to attack someone, you want to justify it, and then you compose this call to arms. That's not what they were, but they served the posterity. They served later, during Zhou, when the Zhou rule was already established, they served as this commemoration. They were always justifying and legitimizing the rule and the possession of the mandate of heaven. So they kept doing this in a special ritual that Martin Kern also describes, where he says the texts of the harangues were used as librettos, where they would undergo this whole ritual process of going through the battle with Shang and reenacting it and reliving it and re-justifying it. So the historical narrative that they used in the harangue was used to denounce the enemy and basically give the enemy the bad name, saying you were the offender. They say you are the offender, and the text is the punishment. We got the mandate of heaven, and it's written here, and the text is the punishment. You have the bad name, and you go down in history as the offender, and we go down in history as the winners and the people who are on the right side. So is the curse a harangue? The curse of truth seems actually to have been composed as an act of despair, as an actual call to arms. It was actually written before, when Qin was having trouble with truth. So it's not like, the harangues, the shi in the Shangshu were written by people who already won. They were written by people who already had the battle and won, and then were justifying their action that was successful. Here, things are still in the open. Qin still needs to win. Still needs to win the battle. So so there's a typo here in my presentation. But as the authors of the Curse of Truth, they were only hoping to win. They were not yet winners. So they actually were calling the ghosts to help them. But then there's the act of writing the text on the stone, which proves that the text was also meant as a punishment, that they meant this not only as a hard evidence for the ghosts to show that they were right and true was wrong, but also the text that identifies the offender and sets it in stone and gives the offender the bad name. So this act of writing this on the stone actually shows that the text also, that will be preserved for later generations, the text will serve as a punishment for truth itself. So now, in my quick conclusion, the Curse of Truth is really a unique text, because it was composed by people who took the narrative tradition at its word, meaning it was an actual call for action, meaning what makes the Curse of Truth stand out is that those texts that we see in the Zuozhuan or in Shangshu, those texts, when they say that may the ghosts really punish, the offender who breached the covenant, they didn't really, it was a formula, but they didn't really maybe they didn't really mean it, that they actually will. Or they assume that it will happen in the heart, the sincerity aspect of it, but they wouldn't probably assume that the actual ghosts with actual names who go after the offender. Well, here we have an example of a contemporary text where they actually assume, yes, I'm finishing. So then they compose the narrative to justify this, and they use elements from pre-existing textual tradition to compose the narrative, and they simply hope that the text would work, that this text would be punishment and proof enough for the ghosts to go and punish the offender. So thank you. This is the end of my presentation.
Great, thank you, Fyodor. We'll move on to the second paper in this panel from Hinming Frankie Jik, a PhD candidate at the School of International Letters and Cultures at Arizona State. And his paper is called The Elapse of Cultural Literacy. There's a typo there. It should be literacy, not literary. Xu Shen's postface to the Shuowei Jieze and the ancient script, modern script controversy revisited. And there we go. I see your panel, your PowerPoint. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Sorry for misspelling the literacy. And so this of my paper try to redefine the nature of the so-called ancient script and modern script controversy in the Han Dynasty by focusing on Xu Shen's postface to his Shuowen, one of the most important dictionary in pre-modern China. And many scholars have discussed the nature of this debate, and amongst them, I want to mention two of the scholarly opinions. One is Michael Nylan's, who argues that such a debate did not exist in the Han Dynasty. But on the other hand, Hans Wennes says it did exist, but this debate was not philosophical, but more institutional. That's both campaign, the Asian script and modern script campaign, represent two poles between which different ideas and different opinions were allowed. And this, my paper, I try to analyze this debate and the nature of this debate from different angles by focusing on Xu Zhen's because who has been traced as one of the members of the Asian script campaign, and because of his preferences for the Asian script. My paper tried to set us in Xu Zhen's view, this debate is about how to cultivate the Han, the members of the Han in the Han official system instead of trying to support any specific interpretations. And so let's go on to talk about Xu Zhen's opinions on the Asian script, which is Guwen. Guwen in Xu Zhen's philosophy, we can say was the earliest form of writing in China, which was created by Changjie with 4 I's. And the reasons for Changjie to create writing was to help the sage king in the past to signalize their moral transformation. These functions of writings was largely due to the pictorial nature of the Guwen, which can perfectly reproduce the pattern of the way, behind which the universal principle of the world was hidden. And so because the pattern and the universal principle were not visible to normal people, but Changjie with 4 eyes was able to see them and then to embody the universal principle by creating several earliest Chinese characters that normal people were allowed. Xu Zhen's belief that normal people were allowed to see the universal principle and the pattern of the way. So that's why this is how writing could help the sage king in the past to signalize their moral transformation. And so because the Asian script could perfectly reproduce the pattern of the way, that means any change on the Asian characters mean the deconstruction of the pattern of the way. But in the time of Xu Zhen's, it was critical script, which we can say, which is Li Shu, was the major form of writing during the Han Dynasty. And in Han narratives, this form of writing was created by by Qin Miao and Qin officials. But these statements could not withstand the historical test because newly discovered manuscript have indicated that already before the Qin unification, the critical script had been widely used in pre-modern China, pre-imperial China. So the questions that we need to ask here is two. First one is why Han narrative attribute or Xu Zhen's attribute the critical script to Qin Miao, and the second question is what's the purpose of Qin Miao of creating the critical script? In Xu Zhen's narrative, Qin Miao's reasons for creating the critical script was entirely to provide administrative efficiencies, to help officials to save time to write administrative documents. But in Han narrative, in traditional Han narrative, the most famous image of Qin officials were that they use law and punishment extremely, and they basically receive no moral training under the Qin government. But newly discovered tests like the 回力之道, the way of being an official, told us that they did receive moral training, and the tests they read had counterparts in received classics. So, but such a traditional narrative may give us some hints about why Xu Zhen didn't like the critical script. It's because it's just for administrative efficiencies. And so the major reasons for Han officials to use critical script was that they need to handle and process lots of administrative documents per day during the time, and this prescription 汇率 cited by Xu Zhen in his posts to his 说文解字 and the 汉书译文字 told us that in the Han Dynasty, students who want to be a scribe, a Si, or an officials, they need to learn how to write and read 9,000 characters before they were appointed. And one textual parallels in the Erling Luling discovered in the Zhangze Mountains date to the early Western Han told us that the students only need to learn how to read and write about 5,000 characters. The differences in number indicates that the process of writing administrative document became more and more complicated in the Han Dynasty, and more characters were created for this purpose. And that Bank Zheng Huingma also suggests that in the Qing Han period, a scribe need to appoint assistants to help him to handle administrative document, which means this both and so we can see that from both evidence that in Qing Han period and officials how the workload of an official was so heavy that it was basically impossible for him alone to handle all documents, administrative documents. And so the critical script was a perfect form of writing at that time because it was easier to write. And so, but in Han Dynasty, in Han documents, we see civil phrase which are used to describe a person who was skillful in administrative writing, like 考史书, 能史书, and 现史书. But scholars like Xing Yitian and Itaru Tomiya suggest such phrases were negative by the Middle Western Han Dynasty. And the questions we need to ask here is why was being skillful in administrative writing negative in the Western Han? The major reason is that early Han negative attitude to this ability was partly due to the corruptions caused by those Dou Bi Li who use knife and brows to write administrative document. They were thought to misuse their ability for their personal interest, and that's so there is and so because they misused their administrative ability for their personal interest, there is for the Han government, they needed to provide some moral training to its officials. And so newly discovered tests told us that even Han officials who served in the frontier of the Han Empire, they do read part of the current classics and which were written in critical script. But to Xu Zhen, as mentioned, that the critical script was merely for administrative purpose, and that it could not perfectly represent and embody the hidden pattern and hidden principle of the world. So for Xu Zhen, his preferences for the Asian script was to urge the Han officials to learn to read the Asian script at least in order to receive correct training, because the classics which was set edited by Kongzi, Confucius, was in Xu Zhen's narrative were written in Asian script. However, those people Xu Zhen criticized, the so-called manuscript campaigns member, they also encountered this difficulty and see this there is a necessity for the Han government to morally cultivate their officials and its officials. But their focus is on how to popularizing the classics, which means to help the classics to attract more audience. And so because in Han Dynasty, given that this is crucial for the government to hire more and more officials who could process administrative document. Many of its officials could only read clerical script instead of able to read Asian script, Lao seal script, small seal script, and the clerical script. So, which is to them, which is the most important thing is to help those people who could only read one form of writing to also gain the ability to read classics. So that's why to them, whether the classics were written in Asian script or the clerical scripts it didn't matter. The most important thing is to help the classics to attract more audience and help Han officials to receive more cultivation. But to Xu Sheng's, the true or correct moral training was to read the classics written in Asian script. And so this is by studying Xu Sheng's postface to his postface to his 说文解字, this paper hope this analysis of this debate could help us to give us a new angle to redefine this debate besides what Michael Nyland and Han Wennes said. So that's all my presentation. Thank you. I should do nothing. Yeah.
Yep. Laney's going to take care of you right here.
Thank
And we'll move on to the third paper from Kun Yo, or Yo Kun, a PhD candidate at the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures at the University of Colorado Boulder. So we welcome his paper on the entitled writings, authorship, and the formation of books in early medieval China. Kun, take it away.
Okay, thank you.
You need to start your slideshow.
Yes.
There we go. Brilliant.
Okay. I'm very grateful for Eide Center's organization of the conference. My talk today is about authorship and the formation of books in early medieval China. I propose that we should study the concept of authorship through the lens of book history, recognizing the reciprocal influence between the concept of authorship and the notion of book. With the concern of the history of book, it is important to ask when was the form of the book invented in Chinese history. I incline to find the answer around the time of the late 1st century BCE, when Lucian and a group of experts undertook a bibliographical project for the imperial library of the Western Han. Taking that event as a pivotal point, I use Liu Xiang, Wang Chong, and Liu Xie as three representative examples of their times to showcase three different stages of the notion of books and how this perspective shed a light on the issue of authorship. I will begin with Liu Xiang's bibliographical project. In the late 1st century BCE, Liu Xiang and a group of experts under the mandate of Han Chendi took years to collect, collate, compile, and catalog more than 10,000 manuscripts for the imperial library. This historical event is often studied with the concern of its filtering impact on the transmitted warring text states. However, little attention has been paid to its influence on later authors. I argue that the historical event marks an indicator that the form of the book grew mature and stable. In order to understand the practical root of the formation of books, I break down Liu Xiang's bibliographical project into 4 elements, which is on the right side of the slide. I focus on the Zhu Zi Lue because it is the most relevant to the issue of authorship. Now, the 4 elements. First one, attribution. Conceivably, during Liu Xiang's project, manuscripts were attributed to a certain author figure. When multiple writings were attributed to the same author, it naturally amounted to a compilation. think about them as a physical body. That is the aspect is often neglected when we think about writings. The third one, catalog. Facing the overwhelmingly large amount of manuscripts, classification was necessary for them, not only physically to sort out things, but also intellectually to catalog knowledge. And the last one, also what I see as the most significant element in terms of the formation of books. It is Lucian's editorial report, which features the basic paratextual function. Here I'm implying Jeanette's idea of paratext, which enables a text to become a book and to be offered as such to its readers. Here I use Lucian's report on Xunzi as an example. Please don't read into the Chinese text. I will highlight the most relevant information for you. So here, the 32 chapters, the 32篇 reflects the physical body of the book Xunzi. Here, the report begins to provide information of the author. It is the Xun Huang that is responsible for the writings. After that, this 儒墨道德 implies the category to which the works of Xun Huang belongs to. At the very end of the report, it shows the connection between this editorial report and the book Xunzi in the Imperial Library. In other words, it is more or less defines the book Xunzi. This diagram shows how a book is formed through the process of making bibliography. Lucian's editorial report reflects this process. Making a bibliography requires attribution, thus the identification of an author figure in the report. The description of the textual structure refers to the compilation, and the judgment on the book is more or less reflected by how the book is cataloged. Here comes to my first argument on Lucian's case. It is the Lucian's report that enables a text to become a book and to be offered as such to its readers. As the first example among Lucian, Wang Chong, and Liu Xie, Lucian's project represents the stage at which books attributed to an individual author are made by others and posthumously. Now I will use Wang Chong as an example to show decades later after Lucian's project, how an individual author took advantage of the book form to secure the transmission of his works and authorship. I began with Wang Chong's case with a passage from a postface chapter of the Luncian. I will summarize the content. So in this probably hypothetical conversation, Wang Chong implies the well-known rhetoric of 作者 and 述者. That's like the 述而不作. He claims he is neither of them, rather he is a 论者. Scholars often focus on the rhetorical function of this passage. For example, Michael Pute argues that Wang Chong, by implying the sagehood tradition, tries to secure the transmission of his works. I agree with him on noticing the concern of transmission. However, approaching to this issue through the lens of book history, I ask a different question. Instead of concerning what this passage is about, I ask, why does it even appear? Judging from the surviving evidence, Wang Chong appears to be the first author that comments on his choice of title. He devotes an entire chapter, the 对作 chapter, to argue why he chooses the word 论 for his book title. I argue that the presence of this kind of comment can be explained by the advantage of the form of the book, which provides an individual author with the opportunity to secure the transmission of their writings. The transmission of a writing relies on authority. Before the form of the book comes into being, writings often rely on external sources to support their textual authority. I list 3 typical external resources on the left side of this table. Disciples are often the case for the texts of the warring states masters. Institutions are for the Confucian canons established during the Western Han Dynasty. The form of significant social status vary. We can think of those literary elites, Lu Jia, Dong Zhongshu, Yang Xiong, to just name a few. In contrast, Wang Chong in his lifetime had limited influence and an unsuccessful political career. Neither of these factors could contribute to the transmission of his works. Consequentially, Wang Chong took advantage of the space in the post phase to lend authority to and by himself. Here you can see like this. This is the model of this formation of the transmitted Luanhen. Now we jump forward to the 5th century, using Liu Xie as a comparison to show a developed notion of the book. As the table shows, at Wang Chong's time, the book form was a comparatively new way of transmitting one's writings. In contrast, Liu Xie lived in a time that the book forms has become normal over the centuries. The 2 different backdrops lead to the two authors' different perceptions on their magnum opus. Judging from their own words, Wang Chong is more concerned with his authorship when defining the Luanhen. I argue that, in contrast, Liu Xie is more concerned with the position of Wenxin Diaolong in a specifically identified knowledge category, that is, poetics. Here is the outline of my argument on the Liu Xie's case. I classify my evidence into 2 groups. As for the external factors, the knowledge of catalog has advanced a lot from Liu Xiang and Wang Chong's time. Second, Liu Xie's biography shows that he spent many years of his life with libraries and catalogs. It is confident to conceive that Liu Xie is very well aware of the knowledge classification. The Wenxin Diaolong itself provides the internal evidence. It is a systematically organized treatise. Second, in the post-phase, Liu Xie enumerates his forerunners in the tradition of poetics. It is also reflected by his choice of title. The combination Wenxin emphasizes the knowledge he expounds in the book. These show a very different image of a book against the backdrop of increasing awareness of knowledge classification in the 5th century. To conclude, Liu Xiang's bibliography project facilitated the form of the book as a new way of transmitting written knowledge. Decades after Liu Xiang's time, the new form offered Wang Chong a means to secure the transmission of both his book and his authorship. After centuries, when the book form had become normal, what Wang Chong strove for was not an issue anymore. Instead, Liu Xie tried to find a niche for his work in the evolved ecology of written knowledge. Thank you, and I look forward to the feedback.
Thank you, Kun. So we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. I have one through the Q&A from Matthias Richter that I'll kick us off with, and then other participants or audience members can join in. Matthias actually has 2 questions, one for Frankie and one for Piotr. The one for Frankie is, how do we know that text specifying a number of characters as required qualification for scribes mean X thousand different characters and not the ability to write an exam text of X thousand characters of length? Hold that in mind. And here's the one for Piotr. Piotr, the idea that harangues were based on hypotext makes sense to me, yet how do we differentiate between hypotext and mere underlying convention? Let's take those in order. Frank, you can go ahead and respond to them.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. I didn't say clearly, and it's actually testing how they can write a textbook for the exams with probably 9,000 characters and 5,000 characters. But one tricky question is that we don't know what textbook it is. In the Han Dynasty, we have 仓颉篇, we have 执奏篇, and so on, which were used to test a student or to test scribes to learn how to write and read characters. But one question is that I cannot tell you in specific is were there any characters repeated in another one? Which means all the 9,000 characters and 5,000 characters, they are all different characters. But given that to test an officials their ability to process administrative document, I believe those 9,000 characters and 5,000 characters, even though they are from a textbook or a test for examination, nearly all of them, I hypothesize, nearly all of them should be different characters. So this also trying to tell that there was an increase in the number of characters during the Han Dynasty. I hope it is I could answer these questions.
Okay, Piotr, do you want to take up Matthias's query?
Yeah, I think that this question actually refers to the harangues, and there's the whole talk about canonization, how this thing became the canon. So how the the hypotext existed, and then how this became the canon. I think this I compare, or I kind of make this link between the Curse of Chu and the Shi from Shangshu. Because they kind of highlight the function of the curse and how the curse is actually different from this canon. So they do use, I think it's a convention, basically. They use the conventional language because they think that's what's going to help them, because they actually need help. So they are resorting to the pre-existing, so to speak, canon or material that they could use in order. So what do I do to convince the spirits that I'm right? Well, I'll create a historical narrative. And so this is how they perceive the historical narrative. That's what they thought it was for, and that's why they used it. So this is, the Curse of Chu is unique because it's the application, practical application of those canonical formulae and those, just basic convention. They use the convention they try to use it for what they think it was meant to be. Because I think those canonical texts, they didn't really mean it. You know what I'm trying to say? Like if the harangue is not written before the battle, then its function is not a call to arms. Whereas the Curse of Chu was an actual call to arms. So they took the canon for granted, or they took this convention for granted, that this is the real remedy that they can use. And they can use historical narrative to win over the spirits and then win the battle, or yes, by means with the actual help of the spirits. I don't know if this is good enough as an answer. I'm also willing to brainstorm about this. I have a lot of questions about this myself.
Okay, great, thanks. I see Debbie, you've got a question. Go ahead.
I have one question to Frankie and two questions for Kun. So the first question to Frankie is that when you are discussing the literacy and the ability to be collect, did you take account? Did you take the the criminals who was assigned to be assistant for clerks into account? I just read one article, essays, and which mentioned that Li Chen sometimes were assigned to be assistant for clerks to write reports or something. So I feel like, that's one interesting role, that there are certain status group that they need to demonstrate such ability, ability of literacy. And I would like to know, do you have you taken this into account in your research? And for Kun, the question I have is that I would like you to elaborate more on what you mean by the book format, because my impression is that you seems to define that as book, like Wang Chong's book, as a book on modern tense first, and then to think about how this format emerged from the historical times. So I got a little bit confused, like what do you mean by the new book format, and what's the difference between that book format and the modern day, the book, the format that we are accustomed to. I forgot the second question, sorry. So yeah, so basically it's about like, yeah, how, because yeah, I'm afraid, I'm not sure, but if you have a modern version in your brain or in your mind, then you do the comparison or do the research later, that kind of question. I hope I'm clear enough for you to answer the question. Thanks.
Should I respond first? Thank you for the questions. I just want to clarify is talk about the assistance of the scribe, the scrapbook assistants, their ability to handling and write administrative writing. When I discussing this topic, did I take those assistant into consideration? Is that your questions? Yeah.
There is a status group of criminals who was sentenced to be lifelong criminals, but use as a human sources to help the government dealing with many administrative affairs, like cooking or clicks for criminals. And one of their responsibility is to go out and help the clerks to collect like evidence, you know, this kind of, they need to write down something as a report to the government.
Yeah, thank you very much. I remember you mentioned the article. If you could share the title with me, that would be great. And so first, in respond your questions, to be honest, I haven't considered such a case, but when those people who need to collect evidence for any legal cases in the Qing Han period, but I do remember when I was reading different articles, scholarship on this topic during the duties of the Qing Han's officials. There should be a hierarchy amongst different scrapbook officials during the Qing Han period. Like those assistants I mentioned in my paper, their abilities should be lower than those the people they were serving. Like the document they are handling may be very easy for them to process. The job is just to copy the administrative document because which were very formative, and then what they need to do is just to to add some like fill in the blank, to talk about the numbers and then talk about what happens by using the characters they know. And so when you are saying that to collect evidence, such examples, I do believe this is their duties to mark down what evidence they collect, and then the number of evidence, how many evidence they find for a criminal So when I was saying that an official should learn 9,000 characters or 5,000 characters in early Western Han. I believe the instruction on either 说文解字 or even on the 二人律令 is too general, and in some cases the situation may be different depending on the actual depending on the situation. That some official may learn more characters than others. It just but the instruction on 说文解字 that's an official, ideally they need to learn how to read and write 9,000 characters is such a, I would say it's an ideal case, but in reality they may not need, especially for those assistants, they may not need to learn as much as character as 说文解字prescribed. Yeah.
Okay. So Debbie, thank you for the question. So my short answer is the format of 论衡, the transmitted 论衡, is not significantly different from the modern concept of book in terms of the form. So that's my short answer to this one. And also that kind of relates to my central concern of my dissertation project, that I try to explain what makes the book form stable once it is invented, and how it's just the basic elements remains kind of the same. And I consider this the basic form of a book. First, it must have multiple texts, like several chapters. And then we need those author figure, title, and preface, those most typical Jeanette-defined paratextual devices to overarch those multiple writings to give it a meaning. But in that sense, Wang Chun's 论衡 is a little different from modern term book, is its lackness of the wholeness, because 论衡, the transmitted 论衡, is more like a loosely connected entire work of Wang Chun's time. That's why I bring in Liu Xie's case, because you see in the 5th century, Wenxin Diaolong shows a strong sense of the wholeness of the book. It's systematically designed book. That's a little different, and it's more close to what we now consider as a book. And also another this last point is just to give you another context, is because of these excavated materials from the Warring States times, we now see what are not books during the Warring State times. They are discredited writings circulated independently, and the authorship and the titles are not commonly seen on this. So I consider before Liu Xiang's time, that's kind of a prehistory of book. So that's my answer.
Okay, I'd like to just quickly pick up a pair of questions for Piotr in the chats before we go on to the next panel. One is from Doi Shen, who asked, could you say more about the context or where was the original Curse of Chu published? Was it buried, or were there also copies circulating to different states to make the curse an interstate event? Wait a minute, there was a question from Terry Kleeman in here, but it just disappeared. Maybe you answered it.
I just answered Matthias's question.
You typed, was that Matthias's question?
Yes.
Oh, there's a question from Terry Kleeman here too about whether it's possible that the early recorded harangues were pronounced orally at the time of the battle and then recorded afterwards in literary form.
Yeah, so this one was what was the answer, what I was answering right now. Okay, let me first answer the first question. That's a very, very good question about what happened with the text. So it is interesting because the original stele, there were three, because there were three ghosts that overlooked the covenant. So there were three ghosts in charge of supervising. So if the covenant would be broken, those are the three exact named ghosts that would go after the offender. And so when Qin claimed this right to punish Chu and called upon the names of those three ghosts, they carved the text in the stone, and then the three steles were buried underneath the temples to those ghosts. So that kind of shows you or gives you ideas about the function, the original functions of the text, that they were actually written for those ghosts that somehow needed, this to be written on the stone and so on. So that was not on public display. And then later, those were found, excavated, and then there's the whole history of like how this text was processed. So there were rubbings that were made. One of those is considered inauthentic, fake, like a Sung Dynasty forgery. But two of those stele texts survived. They're not the same. They differ slightly. Some are longer, some are partly damaged. So then by, they compare the texts and they fill what is missing in other texts from the other texts. And in any case, so they did the rubbings, and then the rubbings were also lost. One rubbing was in the possession of some scholar and then was lost, but the copies of those rubbings survive. And so those copies are deemed authentic, because there was another question about the authenticity. So all the scholars agree that not only Kuo Mo Ruo, but most recently Li Ling believes that there's no doubt about the authenticity of the text. But the original text was written on the carved stone and buried under the temples of those respective spirits to which it appealed, which I think is very relevant. And then I was answering the question about here about whether or not the harangues were based on a hypertext. There was this question about Chu Ci and whether or not these texts were first orally actually performed before the battle and then later written down. So that question is answered by Martin Kern when he discusses the harangues. And he believes that, yes, he believes that there was the original harangue. And later, post factum, the texts were composed to fit into some sort of a formula. But these texts were performed; they were performative texts. And personally, I also believe in that. I studied other texts earlier, and I believe in. I'm convinced about the performative function of most of those texts. So even texts such as Chunqiu were, ritual texts that were performed during sacrificial ceremonies in the temples. And so I imagine, Martin Kern argues that the shi, the harangues from Shangshu, were actually performed during rituals. And so they pre-existed in an oral form, and later they were formulated by, written down and passed on and became a canon.
Great.
So those are my answers.
Great, thank you so much, Pyotr. Let's move on to our fifth panel, image and symbol. And it'll be our last panel, and we start off with Helena Chen, a PhD candidate in art history at the University of Florida, who will be speaking on the social life of the Xinjiang jade tiger in the Freer Gallery of Art. Helena, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So I'm now sharing my slides.
There we go.
So the title I'm going to present is The Social Life of a Xinjiang Jade Tiger in the Freer Gallery of Art. In September 1923, Carol Whiting Bishop, assistant curator at the Freer Gallery of Art, set sail for China to carry out an archaeological expedition. On September the 8th, the first day he arrived at the Lijialou site in Xinzheng, Henan province, he recorded, "I also found in the same loose earth a small, archaic figure of a tiger, perhaps 2 centimeters long and of the same translucent jade." Buried in his 20-some page reports, modern scholars never paid heed to the details of Bishop's finding. Thanks to a workshop organized by the Freer Secular Gallery in the 2018s, I got the chance to find this piece, which had never been exhibited, published, and studied. My study explored the social life of this early spring and autumn period jade tiger, its production, form, functionality, discovery, and collecting history. The Freer tiger is made from a semi-translucent green stone. It is shaped as a tiger in profile, with an arched back, coiled tail, and a large head bent forward, a gaping jaw, and two small paws. A hole for suspension pierces its hindquarter. Another hole is partially remained on the broken part of the tiger under its muzzle. Eastern Zhou tiger-shaped jade pendants could be categorized into three forms: the arched, horizontal, and inclined. The Freer tiger belongs to the arc-shaped category. With its extremely curved, the disproportionately small claws, and its surface decker divided into groups with longer incised lines separating shorter meanders, it is possible that the artisan who made the Freer tiger borrowed characteristic features from tigers similar to those excavated from the Huang state tombs. Both sides of the tiger have straight and curvilinear incise, with one side more detailed than the other. On one side, the artisan attempted to depict its opening jaw by placing a group of short lines around an incised circle. Here, he is imitating the hole drilling technique used in making flat pendants, but the result was somehow unsuccessful. On the other side, the artisan fixed his depiction, marking the structure of the tiger's jaw more accurately. In terms of its function, I suggest that the Freer tiger should not be equipped with the ritual tigers, one category of the 6 ritual jades, or 六器, recorded in the rites of Zhou. Based on archaeological finds, the ritual tiger category of 六器 refers exclusively to a kind of long, curving, S-shaped tiger that were usually unearthed in the Chu region in southern China. Some of this kind were inscribed with self-referential text. Different from this kind of dragon-shaped tigers of Chu regional style, the Freer tiger was made in a style commonly seen in the Central Plain and should not belong to 六器 that were used for ceremonial performance. So, if not a ritual jade, what then was the function of the Freer tiger? Bishop's archaeological report offers us a glance into its burial context, especially its associate finds. He found the piece around a human skull together with cowrie shells, beads, and jade plaques. The two of them are now also in the Freer Gallery of Art. Possible associate finds also include rings in variable sizes. I suggest that the Freer tiger, together with these associate finds, were together used as coverings for heads or fu mian. They were sewn onto textiles, forming a sort of veil to be placed above the face of the deceased. Aimed to protect the dead against corruption and evil spirits, such coverings had their beginnings in the Middle Western Zhou and progressed into full jade burial suits in the Western Han Dynasty. Using jade tiger as face coverings was not uncommon in the Eastern Zhou. Examples show that they could be placed on the eyebrows or middle and lower face of the deceased. So finally, another important question needs to be asked. The excavation of Li Jialou site was known for its strict military control. Then how could Bishop remove several objects out of the site? After the site was found accidentally by a group of peasants drilling a well, Jin Yun'e, who commanded governmental force around Zhengzhou region, quickly took control over the site and denounced that all objects excavated were national assets that belonged to the public. However, unfortunately, major attention was paid to the monumental bronze masterpieces. Local Henan officials and scholars showed relatively disinterested attitude to the kind of tiny non-bronze artifacts. When making the Jinshi catalog, which was supposed to encompass all the unearthed objects, certain tiny objects were excluded. Paradoxically, though claiming that all the unearthed objects belonged to the public, Jin Yuan'e indeed kept a number of objects in his own collection, as well as sending some of them to his friends. In doing so, he retained an attitude named refined playing, Yawan, that had long been shared within the Chinese literary circle, a tradition in which antiquities were collected privately and displayed exclusively to fellow enthusiasts. Appointed by Director John Lodge as assistant curator of the Freer Gallery of Art, Bishop was sent to China to undertake archaeological work in 1923. From a historical point of view, Bishop's Xinzheng reconnaissance took place during a time when the tension between imperialism, nationalism, and regionalism strengthened in China. In the case of Li Jialou digging, Bishop represented one kind of imperial archaeology. Believed in the popular theory of hyperdiffusionism, Bishop's interest in collecting scientific data was largely aimed to place Chinese material in a broader sense of world history and civilization. Frequently seen in his reports were also complainings about how deplorable, how tragedy the Li Jialou excavation were done by Chinese workers, how the burial contexts were lost, how the artifacts were damaged and abandoned. Equally important was the national versus regional competition. National scholars and officials in Beijing hoped to ship objects from Li Jialou to the capital, while regional scholars in Henan persisted that objects should stay within the province. Bishop himself recorded this predicament in between the competition. Due to the absence of a powerful central government, Bishop felt that even if he got permission from the capital, it was still difficult to undertake actual archaeological excavation work in local regions. His first trip to Xinzheng was terminated due to lacking of a digging certification. Yet, with a permission in hand during his second trip to Xinzheng, Bishop's endeavor to simply visit the site was still hindered by the local government. Later on, the frequent changing of political, intellectual, and economic conditions in China proved that Bishop's requests for permission to dig was almost futile, not to mention bringing objects back to the United States. The Freer Gallery's Chinese expedition finally ended in 1933 when the conditions in China became intolerable. The Bishop paper, which includes his unpublished manuscripts, photography prints, negatives, drawings, rubbings, and maps, now lies quietly in the Freer Gallery's archive and deserve more attention. Thank you, and this is all of my presentation.
Thank you, Helena. We'll move on to the second paper in this group from our own Keith Knapp, head of SEECR, professor of history at the Citadel. You'll speak on the changing face of devotion, images of filial piety stories in Northern Dynasties, China.
Okay. Oh, no. Oh. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay, I am going to try to get us where I need to be. Oh.
While we wait, we can look at this lovely dashing picture of Keith in front of the Yellow River. Ew.
All right, I'm, oh, slideshow. Okay. And now I'm going to do the share. And voila, can you see it?
That's it.
Okay, good. Whew.
Take us away.
Okay. I'm going to put myself on a stopwatch. Okay. The
Right.
past 20 years has witnessed the excavation, reinterpretation, or reemergence of many northern dynasties, stone coffins, and beds. Since these are often lavishly decorated and unique to the North, they tell us much about the history, social values, religious ideas, and burial customs of Northern Dynasties China. A common motif on this mortuary furniture is filial piety stories. Although these artifacts are fascinating to look at and beautiful to behold, why should we pay heed to how these stone structures are decorated? I contend that funerary equipment adorned with filial piety stories are historically significant for several reasons. One, they indicate the importance of Confucianism to the Northern Wei's elite families, particularly after the transfer of the capital to Luoyang. Two, filial piety images play a much more prominent role in the tomb decor of the Northern dynasties than they do of the Eastern Han. Three, they reveal which filial piety stories were popular at that time. And during this period, during the Six Dynasties, there's lots and lots of filial piety stories that are written down and circulated, but we really don't know which were the ones that got the most notoriety. And I think images are a great way to find that out. Four, the story's contents and the way they are depicted also shed much light on aspects of filial piety that Northern Dynasties peoples most admired. Okay, so I'm going to try to go down. Oh, I'm having the same problem as Eric. I don't know how to get myself to, oh, there we go. Eric, you and I are in the same boat. Okay, so in the last 20 years, archaeologists working mostly in Datong have excavated many stone beds. And at the same time, a number of Northern Wei funerary equipment that was held by private collectors has finally started to be displayed in different museums. So we have a really good look now at these artifacts. And so now we have close to 50 of these pieces of funerary equipment so that we can get a really good contextual view of where these things are, how many are decorated, etc. So table 1 shows you that actually before the capital moves to Luoyang, there's not many. And then a whole bunch of these come out of the Northern Wei, and then there's a few in the dynasty, and then the subsequent, Eastern Wei, Western Wei, Northern Zhou, no area artifacts that have illustrations of the filial piety stories. So they're on a little bit more than 1/3 of these artifacts. And I think that they're not on everyone is a good indication that these aren't just something like the artisans, okay, we got to order for a funerary bed, let's just put these filial piety stories on to fill up space. No, I think they're requested by the tomb owner or or his descendants because they are things significant. These artifacts are coming from Luoyang. One of the few exceptions to this is the Sima Jinlong lacquered screen that was in Datong. And then also, of course, the Guyuan sarcophagus. And I think those are sort of very exceptional. All right. And so anyway, that many of these are coming out of Luoyang, and they're associated with very high-ranking families, indicates that these were very important political statements and had probably much to do with the Sinification policy of the Northern Way. Okay. All right, and so how are these different from Eastern Han depictions of filial piety stories? Zhou Qingquan has pointed out that Northern Dynasty filial piety images are actually much closer to the body. And in the Eastern Han, we find these on pictorial stones or on artifacts that were sort of outside of the coffin, right? Or on the walls. And so actually they're pretty far away from the body itself. But with the Northern Dynasty's exemplars, they are the body is resting within a stone coffin or a stone sarcophagus that is illustrated with these things, or it's lying on a funerary bed that has these depictions. So the body is very much in contact or very close to these filial piety stories. Also, Eastern Han, they would have all sorts of different types of exemplars, outstanding women, loyal servitors, whatever. In the Northern Dynasty's artifacts, it's just the filial piety story. So the filial piety stories are of really great interest. Also, Eastern Han images are found outside of the capital. We don't find any royal burials that I know of in Luoyang that have any filial piety stories, right? For them, oh yeah, our guys are filial, we don't need to worry about it. And so it's much more of a provincial elite thing. Here in the Northern Dynasties, it's very much a court elite phenomena. Okay. All right, and then a sort of format change is Eastern Han images of filial piety stories are all done in just one scene. But quite differently, in Northern Dynasties, we see a switch to either 2 scenes or even more scenes than that, which shows that there's a lot more importance given on the actual story itself and the importance of particular scenes within that story. So that actually the viewer is supposed to view the progression of the story of this artifact. And it also helps to emphasize things such as, you know, filial piety is going to bring you benefits. So on the left from the Sima Jinlong screen, we can see that Shun's father Gushou and his stepson are dropping rocks into a well which Shun happens to be in. And of course he escapes death. And then on the right, you see the second scene where, yeah, he's such a filial guy that Yao gives him his 2 daughters in marriage, right? So he gets a reward. And there's the Nelson side. And not only do these stories change in how they're formatted, but also which stories are representative or represented change. And in this all too small screen, and you can't really see it, what we see is that there's a number of stories that were illustrated in the Eastern Han that continue to be illustrated. But then there's a whole bunch of new ones that, you know, they're not new in the sense that they were just created, but they're newly illustrated, right? That before in the Eastern Han, nobody bothered to make an illustration of them. But now here in the Northern Dynasties, all of a sudden, these are getting illustrations. And these are the stories such as Guoju, Shun, and Caishun. Okay. And this document or this table shows you how many times each of these filial sons appears on each of these 19 artifacts. And anyway, what we see is that Guoju is the most common tale. And the next are Dinglan and Dong'an and Yuangu. So amongst the 7 most frequently depicted tales, 4 of them are these newly illustrated tales: Guoju, Dong'an, Shun, and Caishun. All right. Okay, and one of the interesting things is that these illustrations all of these illustrations now in the northern dynasties really emphasize the miraculous father in a very tender way, right? Here in the Northern Dynasty, we have the same story. And let's look at the right, the Boston one is much clearer. Here, there's a new person in the scene. Dongyong is still taking a nice, caring look at his father, but the heavenly female is there too, helping out, taking care of dear old dad. All right, and of course, Guoju Mai'er, yeah, he's going to kill he's going to bury his son alive, but heaven intercedes and gives him this big pot of gold, right? And so there's a very strong emphasis on the miraculous. At the same time, there's also a very heavy emphasis on violence, right? Guoju is going to bury his son. And in other cases of suicide, Saishun is going to throw his body in front of a fire to protect his father. And one last point is that we see more and more of these stories. In the Eastern Han, the recipient is usually the father. But in the Eastern Northern dynasties, we see mothers really come to the fore and claim an equal space. And the most important exemplary example of this is Dinglan. In the Eastern Han, he makes a image of his father, but in the Northern dynasties, the image he makes is his mother. I am 25 seconds over time, so I will stop there. Thank you very much.
All right, a model of discipline as well as a filial piety. Thank you, Keith. And for the last paper in this panel and for this roundtable, we will have Harry Rothschild, professor of history at the University of North Florida, talking about flower power, the development of the cult of the chrysanthemum in 7th century East Asia. Boom, let's have it.
All right. It is very apropos that I give this paper today because tomorrow is Chongyang and that's one of the focal points of this paper, the connections between Chongyang and its signature flower, the chrysanthemum. So this is my 14th SEECR conference, the first virtual one. I wanted to thank Andrew, thank Lainey and everyone else at the Eide Center for providing this cyber forum and for making this conference possible. Down in the lower left-hand corner of this first slide, you see a scene from Zhang Yimou's Curse of the Golden Flower. I figured that when I watched this movie, he was just trying to bedazzle us with color, his usual sort of scheme, bedazzle the audience with color so that you forget the plot is sort of convoluted and lame. But as I thought of it, said you have the presence of Gongli as a Wu Zhao-esque empress. You have a stunning yellow carpet of chrysanthemums, and you have the centrality of Chongyang in the plot. And so this has all remained fixed in my mind, this movie. But anyways, Chongyang, I mean, the chrysanthemum, the focal flower, both in the movie and in the paper, is part of the cultural DNA of China. It's an integral part of Chinese poetry, art, medicine, and festivals. There's an abiding fascination and cultural fixation with this anomalous flower. It's unusual in that it blooms in the autumn when other flora are withering and dying. For instance, in the yearling of the Record of Rites, and the yearling is a catalog of seasonal events that serve as a collective and sort of set a collective court-imposed biorhythm of the empire. It's recorded that in the 9th month, the yellow chrysanthemums flower. In the work of Ming herbalist physician Li Shizhen, it is written that he summarizes the many purposes of chrysanthemum. One can use its sprouts as a vegetable, suckle on its leaves, eat its flowers, turn its roots and fruit into medicine, bag up its fibers to make a pillow, or ferment it to make liquor. In other words, what can this chrysanthemum not do? In conjunction with China's first and only female emperor, Wu Zhao, this paper examines two basic capacities of the chrysanthemum. One of them is looking at the chrysanthemum as xianyao, as medicine of the immortals. You have wild chrysanthemums growing in the mountains. Physicians, medicine gatherers, and pharmacologists prize them for their medicinal efficacy. And so over time, the flowers become associated with longevity and immortality. In the Shennong Bencao Jing from the Eastern Han, it's written that the chrysanthemum has a bitter flavor, but is balanced and non-toxic. It can cure dizziness and vertigo, swelling, hypertension, tearfulness, skin conditions, atrophied muscle, malevolent chills, and rheumatism. Prolonged consumption of the chrysanthemum can improve circulation of blood and qi, prolong one's life, and make one's body light. Once again, what can the chrysanthemum not do? You read these early medicinal texts, whether it's Fu Xuan's poetry from the Western Jin or Tao Hongjing's work, time and again, the anti-agithetic qualities of the chrysanthemum are greatly appreciated by Taoists, Buddhist physicians, and rulers alike. The chrysanthemum also emerges as the centerpiece of Chongyangjie, of the Double Ninth Festival. In the late Tang, poet Jia Dao refers to it as Huangjujie, as the Yellow Chrysanthemum Festival. During this festival, people wear chrysanthemums, drink chrysanthemums, eat chrysanthemums, and poeticize and aestheticize the chrysanthemum as well. For instance, and there's a lot made of the fact of the sort of homophonic consonants between gao, the chrysanthemum cake that you consume, and gao, the heights. You dung gao on Chongyangjie. There's the picture in the upper left-hand corner of Dufu climbing on high and looking over the mountainscape. And there's also homophonic consonants between the chrysanthemum, ju, and jiu, the number 9. I mean, it is the double ninth. The 9th day of the 9th lunar month is the Chongyang festival. And jiu, long-lasting or long-lived. And also jiu, alcohol, jiu, which the chrysanthemum leaves are put in. You have the, David McMullen, among others, has noted that in the early Tang, there's an evolution of the chrysanthemum, and the flower becomes associated with the ruler, his health, and imperial authority. He's demonstrated that the chrysanthemum becomes prominent in the imperial version of the double ninth ritual and is co-opted into the dynasty's own imperial floral lexicon. So by the early Tang, this humble autumnal flower, cultivated in both private gardens and the imperial park, changes from a symbol of individual adversity and stoicism, as it was for poet recluse Tao Qian. You have the image in this picture of him by the Dongli, by the eastern hedge, admiring his chrysanthemums on the double ninth. It evolves to represent, and I quote McMullen, the continuity of dynastic power, the permanence of the cosmos, and the longevity of the reigning emperor. Under Wu Zhao, in the midst of this evolution that we see during the Tang, the chrysanthemum rises to cultic status. And the paper, I know it's a mess at this point, those of you who have had a chance to read it, documents how chrysanthemums connected to Wu Zhao are discovered on 3 mountains that are closely connected to a person, Mount Wutai, Mount Koshi or Goshi, and Mount Shaoshi, part of the greater Mount Song range. There's also a focus on the Chongyang festival, with its chrysanthemum as its centerpiece, and how it was intimately linked to the inauguration of Wu Zhao's Zhou dynasty and to multiple announcements of personal and political triumphs. Not going to try to cover all of this, but suffice it to say that Bingzhou was very near to Wu Zhao's hometown of Wenshui. After she visits Bingzhou in 660 with her husband, Emperor Gaozong, in 3 of the following 4 years, she and Gaozong send Buddhist monks and other officials on missions to Mount Wutai with the specific objective of gathering chrysanthemums. Mount Koshi, the last 2 mountains, both Mount Koshi and Mount Shaoshi, are near to her divine capital, her Shendu, Luoyang. Mount Koshi is closely connected to the Queen Mother of the West. I've documented elsewhere in other work Wu Zhao's own efforts to sort of frame herself as the Queen Mother of the West. And one of her male favorites, one of the Zhang brothers, frames himself as Wang Zichao, the Taoist immortal and Western Zhou prince, Wang Zichao. And there is a legend based on Mount Koshi of a Juhua Xianzi, of an immortal chrysanthemum maiden who, moved by Wang Zichao's elegant playing of the panpipes, descends on a red-capped crane, and the 2 of them, although it's on the double 7th rather than the double 9th, fly off on a crane. Mount Shaoshi is part of a group of peaks in the mountain range subsumed under the name of the Central March Mount, Mount Song, Zhongyue Songshan. There are wild chrysanthemums that are native to this place, and just to give one example of the role of chrysanthemums during Wu Zhao's period and their connection to Shaoshi. In 683, Yang Zhong, part of her stable of talented propagandists, writes an inscription devoted to the goddess of Mount Shaoshi. And that goddess is the younger sister wife of Sha founder and culture hero Yu the Great. It's written that the Shanhai Jing verifies that the yellow flowers of Shaoshi never wither and fade. And Juhua chrysanthemums are also known as Huanghua, as yellow flowers. Also, probably the most poignant evidence for connection between Wu Zhao and chrysanthemums comes from her repeated celebration of the double 9th. She inaugurates her Zhou dynasty and the Tianshou, the heaven bestowed rain era, on the 9th day of the 9th lunar month in 690. In 692, she inaugurates the Changshou, the protracted longevity rain era, not only to mark her regeneration of 2 teeth, spring and her autumn years, to show that she is like the chrysanthemum blooming in the fall. The following year, 693, she announces that she is a Chakravartin of the Golden Wheel, Jinlun Wang. There, as in at other times, well, all of these are from elevated vantages. 2 years later, Tongtian Wan Sui, the completion of a new bright hall, one of these sky-piercing towers in Luoyang, also on the double 9th on Chongyang. And finally, in 697, to celebrate victory over the Khitan and the casting of Jiuding, the 9 tripods, on the double 9th once again, she stages a large celebration. There's very little that I've found so far, poems about chrysanthemums closely associated with these events. Working on that. Paper is still a work in progress. So the provisional conclusion of this paper is that There's a cult of the chrysanthemum closely connected to immortality, sovereignty, and the double ninth that blossomed during the co-rule, regency, and reign of Wu Zhao. And that the chrysanthemum lent its flower power to elevate and amplify her distinctive and novel brand of emperorship. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Harry. So we're now ready to take questions. So everybody can turn back on their mics, and we will take questions. I see Piotr has his hand up, so let's start with him.
Yeah, it's not a very serious question, but it's I think it's important. Harry, do you know what, are you aware what Juhua means in modern Chinese slang? Because
no, I'm not. It's been 5 years. Tell me.
Usually I cannot tell you on this. You have to find out. It's you should know.
Okay.
That's all I'm telling you. Just find out. Go and find out. Just go and find out.
Someone type me a message. Give me a clue. Don't leave me in the dark.
No. Okay, I'll email you later.
Okay. Thank you, Peter.
More questions? Also, of course, we can always take questions typed in from the audience. Hi, I see you. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Is it me?
Yes.
Okay. I have one question to Professor Rothschild and one for Keith Knapp. So it's really interesting because I used to listen to the talk by Andrew Lo from SOAS, and he also studied all different kinds of chrysanthemum and the relationship of the particular obsession of this botanic flower with the literati community. And then what I learned more about this talk is that it is more related to the royal family. But then for the Mingqing dynasty, as far as I learned from Andrew Lo's talk, he informed us that the price was hugely high, like one piece of one branch of chrysanthemum, whatever color it was, purple or something, then it could reach like 4,000, 5,000 pounds of our modern, yeah. So then it means that this kind of taste become extremely elite framed. But then because of the Chongyangjie, it was more like a larger community and a social event. So I wonder, how would you classify the taste of this chrysanthemum during the Tang Dynasty? Was that more royal taste, or was that expensive back at the time, or did they already classify different colors and then so many catalogs? He also mentioned a lot of poems in his talk. So I'm just curious how expensive is such a taste back at the time.
I think that sort of horticulture and flower breeding really takes off in the Song. And the Song has like, Fang Chengda has a bunch of Jupu, kind of treatise on chrysanthemum that list 20 or 30 different kinds of chrysanthemum, and that probably those elite markets take off in late imperial China. I mean, I've been focusing just on the yellow chrysanthemum and Chongyangjie that grew widely in a lot of different wilderness areas and different mountains and valleys. And I think that although it is being in the process of being appropriated by the imperial family and into sort of different kinds of court ritual, that it still is an integral part of popular culture and is fairly widespread in the Tang. But that's a provocative question and one I probably need to address. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it's very interesting. I have one more question to Professor Keith Knapp, because the internet was not really clear, so I might have missed a very small part. But I think there was this kind of debate how the idea of filial piety appeared in the Buddhist tradition. One says that it was before it came to China, and one says no, that actually that only after it came to China, filial piety is embedded in the Buddhist tradition. I wonder how do you find those Sixth Dynasty images, and how much influence do you find the Buddhist tradition influencing the source material that you are looking at now? Just out of curiosity.
Thank you, Yanai. And are you coming from Beijing? So it's like 2:46 a.m. If that is the case, I admire your ability to ask articulate questions, because I doubt I would be able to do so. Well, anyway, the short answer is that in these stories, in the Sixth Dynasty stories, we don't see any Buddhist influence, I would say. And I've written a piece on Chinese filial cannibalism. And in that piece, I talk about how you start to see influence on the stories in the Tang Dynasty, where you start to have Buddhist Jataka tales of Shanzi, and also this guy Sujati, who cuts his flesh to feed his parents while he's escaping to another city. And those are really the first traces of Buddhism. And actually, interestingly, if you look at the early Guanyin stories from Six Dynasties, I think I remarked on this in Selfless Offspring, and I think Rob Campany has translated those. Actually, a lot of them imitate filial piety stories, but instead of Tian being the savior, it's Guanyin who comes in and affects the miracle. So I think that it's a bit that the Buddhist influence is late. And as for the question about whether filial piety was Chinese or Indian, I think scholars of Buddhism have really shown that the Indian Buddhists already had this idea, and basically had an idea of filial piety, and that when it gets to China, there's already these ideas there. And basically what happens is that Chinese Buddhist writers amplify certain aspects of the tradition. But, like if we go back to like Ajanta or some of these Buddhist grottos in India, they already have dedication saying that they're doing this for their parents and doing it to, get them a good rebirth in the afterlife. And so yeah, I think that's pretty much settled, that, yeah, the Indians had their own sense of filial piety, and the Buddhists brought them with it. And then they just had to adjust to the Chinese idea of it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I see Huai Yu has his hand raised, so you can go ahead, and then Debbie after that.
Thank you. I have a question for Keith and then for Harry as well. And maybe first for Keith, and because he present first. And so it's very interesting to know about this new kind of tablets and images about the story. I'm just curious about the development of the kind of filial piety narrative from the Han. You got the Lucian's kind of show, and then to finally the 24 kind of stories about the filial piety in Yuan dynasty. So what kind of role it plays? And does it have stories that not included in the 24 stories, or kind of more stories are different kind of versions of the story? What do you think?
Okay, so the Liushang Xiao Zizhuan, right?
Yeah.
The earliest that wasn't written by him, and that's probably a Six Dynasties text. And there was accounts of filial children in the Eastern Han, because it was the basis for illustrations, because multiple images were illustrated, and it had to be according to some already written precursor. And then in the Six Dynasties, there's all sorts of texts called accounts of filial children written and they have hundreds of filial piety stories. And so what happens is where the 24 filial sons comes in is it seems to be, those are popular texts written in the late Tang and 5 dynasties. And they simplify filial piety stories, and they take 24, most of which come from 6 dynasties, a few from the Tang dynasty. And during this Song period, before we actually have a book, before we have any extant thing called the 24 filial piety stories, we know that it existed because we find in Song, Jin, Liao, Yuan tombs all 24 stories depicted. And so I'd see those things as sort of more popularized versions of the earlier stories. And some of these 6 dynasties accounts of filial children books are sometimes they're 30 juen long. And so again, the 24 filial piety stories are sort of, you know, taking from that whole big body of texts and focusing on 24 particular ones.
Good. Then maybe thank you very much, and it's a very kind of informative. And then a question for Harry, and it's like your topic because chrysanthemum tea is my favorite tea, and it has medical use for me, and in kind of, and I used to drink it every day because I'm a heat type of person, and the chrysanthemum is supposed to cool down your body, so it's can give you medical kind of use with for certain type of body type in the Chinese, and certain type of kind of disease that we're seeing. And so my question is that in the Chinese, there's not a code for chrysanthemum, but there's a general code for a kind of worship of different kinds of flowers. It's many flowers, like you know, it's said that the Qing dynasty, the Empress Daoguo, she's a particular cult of Mudan and the kind of the Chinese rose, and there is an annual sacrifice ritual for all kinds of 百花神庙, right? And so my question is, what do you find kind of this Wu Zetian, and why she's so particular favorite of the chrysanthemum, and what's kind of a special personal connection you find? What do you take about this?
I think some of it has to do with its proximity to her hometown at Wutai, and the rise of Mount Wutai at that same time in the 7th century as a cultic center of Manjusri. And I also think that it's not the only reason that she uses the 9th day of the 9th lunar month. This is actually just one part of a 4-paper sequence on why she uses the 9th day of the 9th lunar month. So the chrysanthemums are an answer, but they're not the answer. Certainly, she doesn't become a ruler until she is 66 years old, the emperor. And that's one of and she wants to project an image of vitality and agelessness. And the chrysanthemum has these anti-agithetic qualities. And I think that's one of the reasons she chooses the chrysanthemum rather than because Luoyang is her capital, maybe we would think she would choose the peony, because the peony is like the official flower of Luoyang. Yes. And yet she apparently has a rivalry with the peony, but we won't go into that now. But the sort of late blooming chrysanthemum is a useful symbol, and its connections with immortality have a lot to do with the sort of image she wants to project as a sexagenarian ruler.
Great, thank you. In Wu Zhao's court, even the flowers have intrigue. Debbie, it's your question next.
I have a question for Dr. Knapp. So that question is about I don't know if you know, there is stone sarcophagus excavated in Anyanggu in 2007.
Yeah.
And you know that, right?
Yeah, I've
So
seen it. Yeah.
they are, you've seen that?
Yeah.
So there are some
It's in Zhengzhou.
on the stone couch. And my question is somehow related to your eyes question, but in different direction. That I've been to the museum, the Zhengzhou Museum, and seen the sarcophagus in person, and I found that in the foot of the couch, the mortuary couch, there is an image of a birdman, which usually was related to Socratean imagery. But the birdman was dressed in like in the Chinese long sleeve or loose sleeve, that kind of imagery. And I discussed with Professor Steinhardt, and she said that she didn't think the birdman is related to Socratean imagery, because the dressing is different from the Central Asian style. So I feel like it's interesting, like in such a couch with filial piety stories and with a birdman iconography, but he is dressed in a Chinese way. So I feel like, can we think about the use of filial piety stories as images on these mortuary objects, and the correlation with other like Central Asian traditions or Indian traditions? I mean, how do you know this, and how do you think about the relationships between these different images?
Well, unfortunately, my learning is too narrow to, I mean, that's a hard puzzle to answer. And I don't really have an answer, because I just focus on the filial piety images. And I can't say that I really understand or can explain the larger pictorial scheme that it's within. For my purposes, it's just important that there's no other exemplar stories. But yeah, I mean, there's usually combined with, images of carts that they probably wrote in, and other things. But yeah, no, I can't explain to you the whole pictorial schemes or part of it. So I'm sorry about that. I'm pretty narrow. Can I ask a question of Helena? And that's all right. So if the jade tiger is going to be on this face covering, do you think it was over a specific feature of the face, or it's just impossible to know?
Thank you. I think this is a very good question. So normally the jade tiger, if it is used in the face covering, it's placed on top of the eyebrows or the lower part of the face of the deceased. But in the Freer Gallery's case, consider the jade tiger is a little bit thicker than the normal pendant we usually see. So I think it would be, there is a possibility for it to be placed on top of the mouth, the upper and lower lips of the deceased. And the similar case had been already excavated in Tianmai Qicun.
Oh, thank you.
And just one quick comment for Helena Chen is that I recently translated a book called 最后的乌歌, the last shamanic chant or elegy of a river shaman by Fang Qi, and it's just chock full of tiger lore from the Bashu region. And it may be of interest. I mean, I think you mentioned the sort of the southern focus of the S-curved tiger?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's something I need to look into. Yeah. So what I mentioned is a kind of greenish type of longer and curving jades. They were excavated from the Chu tombs, especially those from Zhenghou tomb. And they were self-inscribed with their names. So in this case, we can ascribe them as definitely as the kind of ritual jades as known as Liu Qi. So, but for the Bashu type of tigers, I'm not sure it could be identified as Liu Qi. But yeah, I need to look into it.
Thank you.
There's a couple of comments in the Q&A from Christopher Gait. One about the lips, the jaws, and the tiger all being associated in Gua 27 of the Zhou-Yi, which might be an interesting association. And also that there's references to Wang Zichao in the Zhao Shilin, and also lots of Queen Mother of the West references, but no references to chrysanthemums. Two references that might be helpful to people. Do we have any other questions? I see that it's 3 o'clock. So this is our opportunity to wrap up. Keith, well, first of all, before we deal with SEECR business, I want to give one last opportunity to the audience to ask any questions. Not the panelists who are all here and can just talk if they want to, but any of the audience members. Keith, were we going to let Eide join in? And did she want to say something?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Can you let Eide in as a panelist?
Who is it? Liu?
Eide. She's probably Liu she'll be.
She's on there twice.
Well, let them both in.
I see her, I got
Let
her.
them both in. Yeah, we need to bump up our audience. Anyway.
Well, if we give her panelist rights, then she can actually talk rather than type.
She's coming.
Also, I note in the chat that chrysanthemum tea is also the preferred drink of Mao Zedong, Mussolini, and Hitler. I hope that's not a comment on your personality there, Yu.
Well, I hope not.
Just a fun fact.
Well, Lidu says it's not necessary. I mean, either way is fine. You're welcome to join.
But it's a reflection of body type. And they are no big persons, and that type of person tend to be big.
They're all hot blooded.
They're ambitious.
Yeah.
And the chrysanthemum will cool them down a little bit so that they get more healthy.
Obviously, didn't do too good a job of cooling down Mussolini or Hitler then.
Or Mao, for that matter.
Or Mao.
Man,
Yeah.
Chrysanthemum a bad name.
Could have been worse.
Can't get a whole lot worse than Hitler.
Well, while we're all still here, Keith, do you want to take us through whatever SEECR business there may be?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for participating in SEECR this year, especially to the panelists. You know, you folks are what makes it shine and what makes it so important, because you submit such great work and very cutting edge work. You know, I look at the stuff that you come up with and your beautiful PowerPoints, and I think, oh, I better get out of this business because you're making me look bad.
The bar's so high.
So I want to thank you very much for doing it. You and I want to thank you for coming in, from being here, sticking it out until 3 a.m. Beijing time. That is impressive. and also to the Elling Ida Center, I want to really thank Harold Mitchell for letting us, for sponsoring us and giving us a home during the pandemic. And unfortunately, we had hoped to have been at the Eide Center. We've had a meeting here previously, and it is just such a fantastic place. The Elling Ida Foundation gave us the best meals I think we've ever had at SEECR. They were phenomenal meals, and it was just a fantastic place to be and to wander around, because it's really a beautiful facility. And of course, it's open all the time to researchers, and you can make use of the Elling Ida Library, which is fantastic.
Thank you.
So I wanted to make sure that I said that. And then I also wanted to thank Lainey for holding our hands and giving us training on how to do this, because it was, we use Zoom all the time. We use Zoom all the time, and yet we still don't know how to use it properly. I guess we know those few functions that we know and stick with that. All right, of course I'm speaking for myself, but Lainey has been really great at getting us through this and making it very smooth. Everybody was smooth except for me, and that's my own fault. And so, and I'd also like to thank Andrew, who was the organizer this year, and we had a long discussion whether to even do it this year, and given the pandemic situation, and that we wouldn't be able to physically meet. And both Andrew and I agreed that, we can do this virtually. It's not, of course, it's not nearly as great as being together. And one of the things that we found in the 24 years of doing this is that this conference works very well because there's not that many of us. Everybody hears every paper, and it's also very interdisciplinary. And so we have lots of conversations before, during, and after the conference. And so it facilitates not only discussion, but also friendship. And that friendship is really important. And just to give you an example, I met Cynthia Chenault through SEECR, probably from early medieval China group too. And then when I went to publish my book, she was a second reader. And I guess the first reader said, there's too many stories, get rid of them. And Cynthia said, no, all the stories need to stay. And so I could keep all my stories. So this sort of connection really paid off. And that connection had come through SEECR or early medieval China, or both. But anyway, so the meetings themselves are really valuable for making connections. And of course, connections are so important for having opportunities. And so hopefully we can still make connections through, even though having this meeting electronically, but of course it's just much easier if it's done personally. All right, so how our meeting works normally is that we have a volunteer who goes to their university and asks for funding to hold it on their campus. And what makes this meeting particularly different is that usually the host institution pays for the food and lodging of the participants. And so it is a big ask. I think I probably spent about $7,000 when I hosted it a couple of years ago. Huayu, do you remember how much you spent last time?
About the same amount.
About the same amount. So that's how much you're asking your institution for. We hope that, every once in a while your institution, as long as it's in the Southeast, because the idea is in non-pandemic times that most people are going to be able to drive there. So what we're always looking for, of course, are volunteers. this year, Andrew was nice enough to do it. Year before, Huayu did it very nicely at Georgia College and State University. And that was a very beautiful place. Harry the year before. And so anyway, so we're always looking for our next sponsor. So if you're interested, if you think your institution might have a little bit of cash, let's think about it. Oh, I can see Cynthia Chanel. Cynthia, we were just talking about you.
Yeah.
I heard you. I've been very quiet this whole time.
You've been very quiet? Okay.
Yeah, sneaking up on you guys, making sure you're behaving.
Well, I'm glad I wasn't saying anything bad about you.
I sure am too. You gotta hear what I say about you when you're not here.
Oh, I can imagine. Anyway, so if you think your institution might be willing to do this, please contact me and let me know. I'm not going to put anybody, I'm not going to try to pin them to the mat and force an answer now, but if you think there's any possibility, please let me know. And I think there's I'm really not sure after the pandemic what the fate of academic conferences are going to be, whether institutions are still going to be willing to pay for them, to have people come physically, or whether this is actually our future. And of course, I would like to go back to the model that we've held for 23 years, which is actually meeting. And I don't know what the pandemic situation is going to be next year. And I don't quite buy our president's idea that it's going to be available the vaccine is going to be available shortly after this election. And so I think that's one thing in my mind is I don't know whether this is going to persist in the future, or and I hope that it can, and I hope we can find a sponsoring institution that would help us in the future. And I know we have one person who is going to try to see if his institution is willing, and that's fantastic. And I'm glad that that we have somebody who will look into the possibility.
Go ahead.
Anybody have any questions about the SEECR or anything about the meeting?
For those
Or hosting a meeting?
I would also add that if you do host it at your institution, we usually have a keynote speaker. And so your institution gets, a major public talk, and we usually bring in somebody who's relatively well-known that can talk on a topic of relatively broad interest. And then that person usually stays through SEECR and attends the panels, where they have traditionally anyway.
And I think
this time because it was a virtual panel. And also about virtual, I'll just say, I certainly hope that we go back to having conferences in person, but I'd be very happy if a lot of institutions would continue to make video feeds of these things available, because as someone who's, not at a major research institution, it's really nice to be able to jump in on webinars, talks, and other things that I would not previously have been able to join. And obviously we've had this ability for a long time, and we just haven't been forced to use it. And now that everybody's on Zoom all the time, it seems like there's just a lot more scholarly conferences and talks available to me through virtual means than there ever were before. And I actually really appreciate that.
It would make sense to do the keynote speaker as a virtual event.
It would absolutely. And also, of course, if we weren't virtual, then, there's quite a few of you that, are, I mean, in this case, we have, at least two that are in the Western United States, and we had two that were, that were in China, that would not have otherwise been able to join us. So, so that's definitely been a bonus.
Kunyo is joining us from China. Was that the other China participant?
Oh no, I'm in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh,
Now.
you're in Boulder. Oh, that's right.
Chung is at Macau.
Oh, okay, okay.
He doesn't have the stamina that your and I does. I'm sure he had to go to bed.
Well, as Stefan knows, UF is leading the way to have in-person classes, and there's a big controversy. I think part of the problem of committing, though, to a conference on site is that it's a little bit iffy, you know, whether what's going to be happening. Yeah, as you say.
Yeah.
A year from now. But certainly, I enjoyed having you guys in Florida. It's going to be like you're here in Florida every year. I would love, I'm retired, but maybe, you know, we could just look into it anyway. You know, I mean, I could look into it, Stefan and myself, perhaps. Steve, he likes to be called, really. Right, Steve? Whoops, hot. I have a massive, whoops.
Yeah, Steve's going to look at it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's certainly something I personally would like to do if I can, but I don't know what access I have as a retired person is all. Yeah.
Cynthia, I'll just say that the person Keith mentioned is me. I've been planning on hosting it next year, but
you were
given the state of the department right now, things are really up in the air. And
yes,
the original kind of commitment to the money is kind of now iffy. Like, so you know, I'm not gonna say that it's a sure thing right now.
What is it costing now? It's so long ago when I had the group down.
We did it for about 7,000.
Is that all?
That's why you and I did.
It was about 7,000 for us in 2018, and it sounds like for YU it's about the same last year. So.
We asked. A lot of money. Two keynotes. So I just remember we had way more than 7,000. But we have two keynotes, and that's fine. But I think if you just have one keynote and you can budget about 7,000.
Yeah. But there's probably preference to have it at the Eide Center, though, right? Or is there? I mean, between UF and the Eide Center. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, Stefan, I'll get in touch with Stefan later, you know, and maybe we could talk it over, see what can be worked out.
We don't want to, you know, give the Eide Center SEECR fatigue. So it's good to rotate a little bit.
True. You don't want to repeat the same place 2 years in a row, even though you're not there in person. True.
Yeah.
The staff has really helped. Get it.
I mean, we'd be happy to, but I think it's fair to fair to rotate.
Yeah.
Okay. At the Citadel, we've done it 3 times, and I've been told by my dean that that's it. But of course, now we have a new dean, so maybe.
The dean, Keith. Good job.
A new dean and no institutional memory. That would be great.
Although I think universities have really suffered a blow from COVID. So yeah, I'm not too optimistic about how generous they're going to be.
Yeah.
I think everybody's institution is cutting back one way or the other. Even those that survived it pretty well. My own institution has actually survived pretty well, but it's still taken a pretty big hit financially from the fall.
One of the things that gets cut are faculty travel money. So a conference like this is all the more important if we can stage something that's local, because it's going to be tough to get funding to go. You know, I think it's going to be a long time before I can travel to China and get the university to cover it.
But you cannot travel to China these days because they
and you can't anyway. Right?
You cannot travel to China, so you don't get money to travel to China anymore.
The AAS also has small grants for the China and Indo-Asia, and back in 2008, 2008 or 2009, University of Georgia actually held it, and you know, which was amazing since you know, everybody was hammered, and they applied for that and got that, and I think that was around $2,000 or something. So it's not of course it can't cover the majority of it, but it was crucial to enabling us to do it. I think we also had, I remember sharing a room with 2 other guys there. Andrew was one of them. And so we were sort of economizing in different ways.
You drive
Really
in,
did it.
rooms.
It's too bad that guy snores so badly. It's just amazing.
What, you mean yourself?
Actually, I'm talking about Steve Eskelson.
Oh, yeah, no, okay. He outranks us all.
Anybody have any other comments that they want to make? Andrew, if not, do we want to just open it up to general discussion, or what would you like to do?
Any other general discussion? Absolutely. I just want to say I really appreciated all of your, all of your papers, your initial abstracts. You guys were all, I mean, made it really easy to put the whole thing together. And your patience in, and working with Lainey and learning to handle the, the Zoom properly. It's probably a good thing for all of us to know. So yeah, I mean, y'all made it a really great conference and a really smooth one.
I think a good feature of this conference is due to the limitations imposed on us by the pandemic, we all actually had to submit things that were typed on paper, and it's I think a very positive thing to be able to look at the other papers in detail. So we might want to consider continuing practice in subsequent meetings.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to pre-distribute the papers.
Yeah.
10 minutes is pretty brutal.
Yeah. Of course, the reason we did it this way this time was because of the 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But even if we have 20 minutes, it still might be a good idea to pre-distribute papers.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And of course, we did 10 minutes because of Zoom fatigue. I've been in enough meetings and heard enough other stories that it was just like, there's only so much Zoom you can do in a day.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're able to be together in person, we could stretch out a little bit more, which would be lovely.
Definitely.
All right, maybe we're done.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. You did a great job.
Thank you, everyone. It's been great. It's been lovely to see all of you and hear what you guys are working on, and to read your papers and hear you talk and get the questions. It was fabulous. So keep us in mind for next year, and hopefully by next year we'll be able to meet in person. But obviously we're going to have to play it by ear, like everything else.
Good to see everybody.
Stay safe and well, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Somebody wanted my phone number. Let me see. Steve? Well, I'll give it to you. Yeah. Okay.